Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this December 1st. Hard to believe we're already into the last month of 2017. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information, and you're doing that already by watching the Alaska Weather Show, and welcome to that. But you can always check on your weather anytime by calling the Alaska Weather Information Line at 1-800-472-0391. Find us online on our website, weather.gov/Alaska, and once you click on that map, you'll be taken to your nearest weather forecast office that is serving your immediate community. You can also find general aviation weather information, more about earthquakes and tsunami risks around Alaska when they arise, and a whole lot more from the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center from that webpage there. So it's a great place to bookmark and start your weather search. And if you can't find what you want or just have a question about what you do see, or a comment or suggestions always welcome, give me an email at david.snider@noaa.gov. Here's a way to find your information tonight as we talk about weather hazards across the region. Winter weather advisories are posted up and down the Chukchi Coast, all the way through the upper Koyukuk and the middle Yukon Valley through Galena, the Seward Peninsula, north and south side, and all the way into the Yukon Delta. And we're talking about a wide range of snow potential there. The Nulato Hills may see as much as 7 to about 10 inches of snow, and some cases around the Seward Peninsula you might end up with as much as 10 to 11 inches of snow. It looks like the blizzard warning will continue until about 9 o'clock tomorrow morning for the western end of the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island. Those areas, winds could gust up to 50 miles per hour on top of additional snow falling in your location from what you've already seen today. That will continue the poor visibility and make travel next to impossible in some cases. So be extra careful no matter where you are up and down Alaska's west coast and of course across the western end of the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island. Just be extra careful. As you look in the Susitna Valley as we go into Saturday and early Sunday, a winter weather advisory is posted there with snow generally about a half foot to about 8 to 9 inches of snow may be possible up and down the Parks Highway and certainly westward. Be mindful of that. But as far as snow goes in south central with the incoming wave, it looks like the bulk of the snow may be drying out, as this will be more of a downsloping wind event for more locations around the Anchorage Bowl region. So stay tuned for changing weather there, but right now the main weather impacts will be wind and snow and perhaps just a touch of ice and glazing around the Yukon Delta as we go into the beginning of your weekend and perhaps as far into Saturday afternoon and early Sunday in some of the more northern locations. Those snowfall should be significantly less up across the northwest coast. Here's a look at the weather satellite picture over the last 12 hours or so, and you can see low pressure working its way in through the central and western Bering Sea. The leading edge of that frontal boundary continues to work its way eastward, and with that we're still seeing plenty of dry air working through the central and eastern Gulf. So folks there across southeast still dealing with a remnant area of low pressure here, but the overall precipitation from that has significantly reduced from where it was and diminished just in the last 24 hours. So some pockets of rainfall there around Petersburg, it looked like again today. Up north, areas of clouds continue across the north slope. Occasional blowing of snow moving through, but the pressure gradient has really relaxed here as well. So the big focus is really across the eastern Aleutians to the Alaska Peninsula and all the way up into the Chukchi Sea, where this very strong front is working through and constricting the wind flow from south to north up across the western coast. As always, you can probably tell what I'm about to talk about, right? I'm pointing at these speckled clouds. Here comes another burst of cold air as shown by the satellite picture, and this will continue to work its way in from west to east as we go through the weekend. But the thing that's going to happen after this as we get into Sunday and Monday is the pressure pattern is really going to tighten up here across south central and the interior. So folks driving all the way through the Fairbanks region will experience that warming effect of the wind coming off of the Alaska range, and the warming wind and the effect of that coming off the Chugach range in Anchorage. Expect some significant warm-ups there, and again, what does that do to the road? So adjust your travel plans accordingly now as we look ahead into Sunday for the Anchorage region, and probably Monday around the Middle Tanana Valley in the Fairbanks region. So a lot to think about. Low pressure across the eastern Gulf today, relatively weak, enough to stir up clouds and some showers, and much improved over the last couple days where thunderstorms were popping up. 962 millibars out across the central northern Gulf there. Areas of snow and blowing snow up the north and western coast. Low pressure sitting up across the Brooks Range, keeping some snow flying there. And rainfall across the Bristol Bay region all the way down through the Alaska Peninsula with some pockets of rain outside of Prince William Sound. As we get into tonight, 964 millibar low out across the west. Snow and blowing snow for many parts of the interior and the northwestern coast. Again, this is open water here across the Chukchi. Some improvement probably in the freeze-up process coming, but not quite yet. So heavy freezing spray still an issue. Snow and blowing snow for many across the west coast and into Norton Sound. And rain mixed with snow across parts of southwestern Alaska. Southeast, maybe a little bit of precipitation across the extreme southern end, but by and large, it might be a little bit of fog across the northern parts of the Panhandle. Looks like things should be fairly tame for you tonight. For Saturday, high pressures building in across the Alcan border, snow developing across the interior and continuing across the west with windy conditions for many. The gusts should start to slow down for the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island as we get through the morning hours. Your weather should gradually improve, so watch for that. But winter weather advisories will continue for many up and down the west coast, and snow will continue to fall. Warmer air is lifting northward across the western Gulf and opening the door to that stronger southerly flow across the northern Gulf, so Prince William Sound may see snow. Light snow may be possible for the Kenai Peninsula and parts of the Anchorage Bowl and into the Susitna Valley, where it will be snowing several inches, in fact, more than a half foot. For folks there with the winter weather advisory in place. Start to watch for a little bit of light precipitation in southeast too. You'll start to see a little bit more of that building in as we get to Sunday. A better chance that will flip over to rain in its entirety, and the pressure gradient tightening up for you across the Gulf. It looks like that process will begin for southeast, but it should be full bore for south central as we get into your Sunday. And you can kind of get a sniff of what's coming here across parts of the middle Tanana Valley in the interior. This will worsen and tighten up as we get into your Monday there, so plan on some wind across the interior, and certainly that warming effect looks possible. A 960 millibar low crossing the Alaska Peninsula, so we are going to have wind for Kodiak, and we are going to have wind for the Alaska Peninsula, and this northwesterly flow will certainly be tightening up and making for a pretty blustery situation for the gaps there, Cold Bay and False Pass, all the way up through Sand Point and into Bristol Bay. So watch for that wind here, but this will produce warmth through the YK Delta, and at least to up around Bethel, it looks like there will be a chance for more rain than snow. You will see some snow at times as we get to this process here by Sunday, but it looks like a better chance of snow on the more northern side through Norton Sound and up through the Yukon Valley, and that's where some of that snow accumulation comes from, of course. Out across the west, snow showers for Adak and Atka and Dutch Harbor and Unalaska. And the southern-facing slopes of the western Brooks Range, snow and blowing snow still possible there. And then, again, that sets the stage for the warm-up for the middle Tanana Valley. So, with that, let's take a look at temperatures as we get into your Saturday and Sunday. We'll see if we detect that there. Here's Saturday morning, single digit above freezing, so 3 degrees here in Fairbanks, South Central, teens, 20s, 30s for Kodiak Island, Southwest, in the upper 20s to low 30s, above freezing for King Salmon, upper 20s to low 30s for most in Southeast. Barrow, you're looking at 2 above, Kaktovik 1 below. St. Paul and St. George, 36 in the morning and near 40 to mid-30s, let's say, for the eastern chain and the Alaska Peninsula. By the afternoon, warmth is pushing north and east, upper 20s and lower 30s for Southwest. Nome 30 degrees, 7 above in Barrow. Kaktovik, Prudhoe Bay, anywhere from about 7 to 8 degrees, 9 in Eagle. Teens and 20s for the middle Tanana Valley, South Central at or above freezing by the afternoon, 42 in Kodiak, and mid to upper 30s for most in Southeast. Sitka about 40, Ketchikan and Annette upper 30s, Dutch Harbor and Unalaska around 38. By Sunday morning, we're at 7, I should say, for Fairbanks, and a little bit warmer as you head southward down the parks, upper 20s and lower 30s there, 35 in Kodiak. Fort Yukon 10 below, one of the colder spots around the Seward Peninsula, 23 in Nome, Kotzebue, and Shishmaref in the mid to upper teens. St. Lawrence Island, 31 degrees there, the upper parts of the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay, upper 20s to mid-30s, 35 in Kodiak. Prince William Sound and Cordova, 34, and Southeast looking at temps in the mid to upper 30s. By the afternoon, we're at 16 on Sunday, so warming up now in Fairbanks. South Central is above freezing, mid-30s to even lower 40s around Homer and Seward, 42 in Kodiak, 27 in Bethel. Nome, you're looking at 28 degrees. Looks like Ambler and Bettles in the single digits and teens. 4 in Barrow. Wainwright, 7 degrees. South Central and Prince William Sound, nearly 40 degrees, and 30s and 40s for parts of Southeast, with upper 30s for the Alaska Peninsula.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to flying weather now. IFR will move out ahead of a frontal boundary working in from west to east into the west coast of Alaska tonight and tomorrow, and into the interior of Alaska as we go through your Saturday. We'll also see increasing IFR across Prince William Sound and the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula and up into parts of Cook Inlet and the Susitna Valley. Noticeably absent of any major obstructions from flying weather will be southeast tomorrow. VFR conditions there and for a large part of the eastern Alaska Range and into the upper Yukon Valley, but well, you'll notice most of the bearing covered up by MVFR, and that trend continues into the afternoon. IFR spreads north and eastward into the northern Gulf there, into Prince William Sound, the Kenai Peninsula, and also across the east-facing slopes of the Alaska Range in the west. So your western Alaska Range passes will have some trouble. The eastern Alaska Range passes, including Mentasta Pass to the north and east, should also be relatively okay. The southeast still looking at VFR, and IFR conditions spreading along the Beaufort Seacoast and the west end of the Brooks Range as we go through your Saturday afternoon. Some improvements there as we get into Sunday morning. Still southeast looking at generally VFR conditions for your Sunday. IFR lingers from Prince William Sound all the way through Kodiak Island and almost to Sand Point. IFR also expected across the western Alaska Range, and MVFR fairly widespread across the North Slope Brooks Range and parts of the western Bering Sea. You'll see a considerable VFR for a large part of the Bering as we go through Sunday afternoon. MVFR listed for the parts of the coastal plain and the Beaufort and parts of the Chukchi Coast. And IFR conditions wrapping around low pressure in the Gulf all the way up and down Cook Inlet just about, and the northern Gulf, and still southeast looking at generally good visibility and fair weather ceilings. Here's AKwx Pass for your Saturday now. Looks like we're going to lean over toward IFR as we go throughout the day. There started MVFR, but transitioning slowly toward IFR as the day goes on for both Adigan and AKwx Pass. As we saw, probably a little more narrow corridor of IFR in the afternoon for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass tomorrow, but still looks like generally IFR conditions will prevail through your Saturday, and the same goes for Rainy Pass. They're looking for instrument flight rule really most of the day. Windy Pass a little bit closer and further away from the bulk of that poor visibility and ceilings. MVFR expected most of the day there, and Isabel Pass may flirt with VFR during the mid to latter part of the day, so there could be some passable weather there during the afternoon. Mentasta Pass looks pretty good. VFR conditions expected on Saturday. Toneda Pass we expect to see MVFR conditions, and as we get into Portage Pass, IFR really most of the weekend and probably only getting worse into Sunday. And then Chilkoot and White Pass and most of Southeast look pretty good. VFR conditions for your Saturday there. Here's freezing levels now, and surface freezing line has jumped way to the north, up around the Gulf of Anadyr, southwestern coast, and pretty much hovering just south and west of Juneau, right along the outer coast of Southeast into the Dixon entrance there. The warmest weather aloft is punching in just south of Kodiak Island. Levels there above 2,000 feet over the island itself and reaching up to Homer, and the 2,000-foot freezing line over Haida Gwaii, so just missing southeastern Alaska. The general flow will be to push this further northward as we go ahead in time. Icing potential is still a little high up there, 5,000 to 8,000 feet across most of the interior of Alaska before you get into any isolated, moderate, or widespread potential for icing there. Southeast above 4,000 feet, the Alaska Peninsula to the eastern chain, the threat is generally above 5,000 feet, and for most of the north and western Bering, including St. Paul, St. George, Nunivak Island, St. Lawrence Island, about 4,000 feet and above right now. The jet stream has our main corridor of weather still coming off the North Pacific. Wind speeds there from about 100 to 115 knots, a little bit slower. It slows down even more as it begins to build a ridge across western Alaska, 55 to 80 knots there, and then descends into a faster flow at about 100 knots across the eastern Gulf. Now, you'll notice that southwesterly flow picks up again across the Pacific Northwest, 80 to about 95 knots on Saturday. At 9,000 feet, a broad southwesterly flow continues across western Alaska. A ridge of high pressure is built in across the Gulf, and we get into more of a west to northwest flow, keeping things dry for southeast. Wind speeds have slowed down a lot across the west coast as well, 20 to 25 knots in most areas. A little bit of that easterly influence, though, still working over the Beaufort Seacoast and the south and easterly flow found at 3,000 feet there, 20 to 25. Southerlies across the west coast and over the Brooks Range. You'll notice wind speeds picking up a little bit here over the Gulf, anywhere from 30 to 50 knots coming in from the south, helping to warm things up again. And then low pressure across the western Bering, anywhere from 35 to 40 knot winds generated on the south side over that, working into the west coast of Alaska. Turbulence potential then is pretty much focused on the west again, along and ahead of that front. Notice winds coming up and considerable moderate possible across the Chukchi coast into the western Brooks Range, into the upper Kuskokwim in the middle Yukon valleys, and across Kodiak Island before 4,000 feet.
By the year 2010, the FAA, or Federal Aviation Administration, estimates approximately 1 billion passengers will travel on board commercial planes. As air travel increases, pilots are faced with more congestion on the ground and in the air.
And while pilots are ultimately in control of their own aircraft, it is the air traffic controllers who are directing them the moment the plane leaves the gate, keeping in constant communication as the plane travels en route.
Our own Johnny Alonso finds out how this complex system keeps our skies organized and our planes on schedule.
During peak air travel times in the United States, there are about 5,000 airplanes in the sky every hour, which is about 50,000 aircraft operating in our skies every day. From the time the plane pushes back from the gate until it arrives at the gate of its final destination, it is being handled by air traffic controllers. These controllers must coordinate the movements of thousands of aircraft, keep them at safe distances from each other, and direct them during takeoff and landing from airports. Air traffic controllers are also responsible for directing aircraft around bad weather and ensuring that traffic flows with minimal delay for both commercial and private aircraft. And I spoke with Gary Laurel from NASA Langley to find out how it works.
An air traffic controller is primarily tasked with separating airplanes. However, they do provide other services such as traffic advisories, weather information, and other status types of information for the National Airspace System.
What are some of the tools used by air traffic controllers?
The primary tool used by controllers for separation services is called radar, which stands for radio detection and ranging. And essentially what happens is from an antenna, a radio beam is transmitted, it bounces off the aircraft and is returned to the radar antenna. And there's a presentation on the radar display of which your position is based on that return. You can see behind us there's a display which is part of the radar system that controllers use, and your position as well as the position of other aircraft in the system will be presented on display and give the information the controller needs to provide air traffic services to you.
So, does one controller handle my plane while it's in the air?
There are a number of controllers that will handle your flight as you move throughout the system. Once you depart, your flight will be handed off to yet another controller, and that process continues throughout the duration of your flight. The primary delineation of what a controller is responsible for in a radar environment is called a sector. So as a controller works you through his or her sector, you'll be transferred to another sector where another controller will work you.
All right, so Gary, wait, walk me through this. What happens from departure to arrival, from gate to gate?
Assuming there aren't any delays, you'll taxi out to your departure runway, and there's a controller that issues taxi instructions and deconflicts you from other airplanes on the ground. There's a controller that will issue a takeoff clearance for you, and yet another controller that will work you as you're climbing to your cruise altitude. As a matter of fact, several controllers. As airplanes move from one sector to the next, there's a transfer of what we call control, and there's a transfer of communications, so that you'll be in communications with each controller along the way. And this process continues all the way to your destination airport, and you may talk to 10 or 15 different controllers en route to your destination. Prior to descending into the terminal area at your destination airport, there are several controllers involved in sequencing you inbound to that airport and assigning the arrival runway. Once you get there, you'll land, you'll taxi clear the runway, and you'll be issued taxi instructions. They'll take you right to your gate, but that's basically how the process works.
Wow. And I thought that the pilot was in control of the whole flight.
Well, the pod is ultimately responsible for the safe operation of his or her airplane. However, they are required to adhere to air traffic control instructions. Just like when you're driving your car, there are certain signs along the way that basically tell you what you're required to do. As you get to a busy intersection, you may have to slow the car down. If there's a red light, you have to stop because you're trying to accommodate other cars, because you're not the only car out there. And that's pretty much the way your air traffic control system works. There are control instructions that are issued because you're not the only airplane out there.
Do you get tickets?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. So in the future, will air traffic control be much different than it is today?
I think so. We're of course not building more airports. We're not building many more runways either, so we have to optimize the use of the facilities that we currently have. And to that end, NASA is looking at cutting-edge concepts and technologies to make better utilization of those facilities, both in terms of capacity, that is to say the number of airplanes you can get in and out of an airport at a given time, and safety as well. And these are just some of the concepts that have been explored by NASA and continue to be explored.
Really? I got a question. How do you change the channel on this? I mean, do you have cable on this thing?
That's all for this edition of Destination Tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. I'm Steele McGonigal.
And I'm Kara O'Brien. For all of us here at NASA, we'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time now for a quick check of your sea ice edge. Updated today, you can see the Beaufort Sea is completely closed off and ice is moving even west of Barrow now down the Chukchi coast and filling in across Kotzebue Sound and moving westward, and Norton Sound is nearly completely closed in there. Ice is moving to just south of Nome and heading for St. Lawrence Island and down the YK Delta coastline and inside of Bristol Bay, as well as areas inside of Cook Inlet. Some of this ice will expand as far westward as 50 nautical miles in the next few days, so watch for a lot of changes and growth potential there, even with strong southerly and warm winds moving through the west coast. You can always get more information about your sea ice anytime by heading to weather.gov/anchorage/ice. Here's a look at the weather in southeast now for Saturday. South and easterly winds moving through the central and southern inner channels. A light southerly breeze, around Skagway and Haines and up through the Lynn Canal. 10 knots with 2-foot seas, not too bad at all tomorrow. And a light onshore flow moving through the outer coast, anywhere from 15 knots or so with 9 to 10-foot seas on Saturday. Light southerlies up toward Yakutat and points west. For Sunday, though, things start to change there. Developing gales across the outer coast as we get into Sunday. Gusts up to 45 knots there around Yakutat. 30 knots sustained from the south and east with 13-foot seas. 9 to 10, even 12-foot seas as you head up the outer coast. On the inside, though, still not so bad. South winds about 10 to 15 knots and 2 to 3-foot seas for your Sunday. Across south central, winds from the east around 20 knots with 4-foot seas. Look for southerlies to develop out of Resurrection Bay and through the Barren Islands. South and southeasterlies 25 knots there with 6 to 9-foot seas. Cook Inlet looking at northeasterlies 20 knots with 4 to 5-foot seas on Saturday. Winds and seas are coming up on Sunday, and you'll notice that in a big way with gales at least across the northern Gulf, 45 to 50 knots and 18 to 20-foot seas across the outer coast there in the northern Gulf. Inside of Prince William Sound, easterlies at 35 knots with a 9-foot sea, and northeasterly winds coming down Cook Inlet. Look for winds to be strong From Homer out toward the western Barrens, 50 knots with an 18-foot sea on Sunday. Inside Bristol Bay, 20 knots with a southwest wind, 7-foot seas expected there. Southwesterlies continue toward Kodiak Island, 15 to 25 knots on either side, 7-foot seas in Shelikof Strait, and 10-foot seas out across the Gulf waters. Look for southwesterlies down the Bering Sea coast, 25 knots with 14-foot seas, and you can see the seas are building up substantially out toward the west. That will shift southward as we head into Sunday. Southeasterly winds working in toward Castle Cape and Chignik. 35 knots with a 19-foot sea, and obviously low pressures stationed right about here for Sunday afternoon. Northerlies on the back side of that with 17 to 18-foot seas with 45-knot winds. 40-knot winds from the east through Shelikof Strait with 14-foot seas there on Sunday. So a lot of wind and high seas as we move through your Sunday afternoon. For the Aleutians, southwesterlies through the entire region there, 20 to 30 knots or so, 35 knots from more of a westerly direction out around Attu, 25-foot seas there. Compare that to 14 to 17-foot seas in the eastern chain on Saturday. By the time we roll into Sunday, we're getting a little bit of a stronger wind across the eastern chain, west to northwesterly winds from Nikolsky to Unalaska, 12 to 14-foot seas there on a 30 to 40-knot wind. Out west, a general westerly flow, 20 to 30 knots with 11 to as high as 19-foot seas out around Kiska and Attu. Across the west coast, south and westerly winds will stay up through Saturday. Over the ice now in Norton Sound, 20 knots from the south. St. Matthew, 25. Southwesterlies, 25 with 17-foot seas around St. Paul and St. George. As we get into Sunday, winds start to move from an offshore location. Remember, low pressures down around the Alaska Peninsula now. East and northeasterlies flowing into that, 30 knots around the Kuskokwim Delta with a 10-foot sea. 10-foot seas around St. Paul and St. George, and easterlies over the ice in Norton Sound at 25 knots. Look for easterlies over the Beaufort Seacoast on Saturday. Heavy freezing spray warnings will continue on Saturday, and we'll likely continue to see heavy freezing spray again on Sunday. 11-foot seas from Wainwright all the way down into Kotzebue Sound with a 25-knot wind from the south and east, and 7-foot seas improving on Sunday. Easterlies continue to be strong off the Chukchi coast as we head through your Sunday. Recapping tonight's weather, wind and snow will be the primary issues across western communities, and in Norton Sound, the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, all the way up through Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound, and certainly for St. Lawrence Island and the Bering Strait communities, where a blizzard warning remains in effect through 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. A 964 low out west fills in a little bit more on Saturday. Strong and strengthening southerly winds for the Gulf Coast communities, and snow developing in the Susitna Valley with a winter weather advisory for you and many of our western communities there all the way into Saturday morning, even Saturday afternoon. Snow will continue to pile up there on Sunday morning. A watch for wind to shape up around Anchorage and eventually into the Middle Tanana Valley and Fairbanks as we head into your Monday. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. We'll see you right here again tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.